Um, I am
Uh,
ready to talk about Travis Bickle.
are you ready to talk about Travis Bickle? Like, are you
I don't know, man.
that okay? We are talking about. I should bring this out.
Taxi driver. Yeah, taxi
Uber
driver.
driver. That'll be the millennial version of of taxi driver, Uber driver.
Yeah, but his name is not Travis Bickle. It's Scooby Doober or something like that. I guess that has different connotations if you think about it. So
He's too high to kill anybody. No, instead of being straight edge, he's completely the opposite. No, so this is late screening, first of all, late screening of Taxi Driver, which turns 45 years old this year,
wow.
strangely enough. It's 1976. It's Martin Scorsese, one of his earlier films. And it's one of those iconic performances, one of iconic movies, but also iconic performances by Robert De Niro as Travis Bickle. I want to say Patrick Bateman.
Patty B.
Different kind of American Psycho. But let's first of all, I want to talk to you about the context of Taxi Driver in pop culture. You had never seen this movie until watching it for this show. Is that right? In keeping with our late screening theme?
Yes. So I kept to the late screening strict parameters that you set forth. And you said, if you don't do this, you're fired. And I said, well, you don't pay me and I don't want any money. So I think we're good. No, this is one of those that I was completely blank slate, 100%. Not like a Ghostbusters scenario where you know the theme song and the characters and all that. I knew nothing, literally nothing about Taxi Driver.
But had you seen the "You Talking to Me" thing, or did you know it from pop culture?
So that's the one cultural osmosis moment that cultural osmosis Jones, if you will, which has no bearing on any of this.
Except
It
that
is.
turns 20 this year.
Oh, there you
Sorry.
go. I haven't seen that since my freshman year biology class in high school, which was so many years ago now that I think about it. Um, but no, the only thing I had known about Taxi Driver was indeed the "You Talking to Me." And I was watching it with Erin and she was like, "Oh, so that's where that's from." Had no idea whatsoever.
So you watched this with Aaron.
Yep.
What was that like?
Well, Erin was it was towards the end of my day and she was still working. So it was kind of a passive watch for her, but it was interesting. I'm going to make this comparison and I think it's a big risk, but it felt to me like Dandelion Wine-ish in that it's kind of like a bunch of vignettes of like a slice of life, but instead of kids running around in the summer, it's just a really screwed up dude uh, who is just like experiencing a bunch of different things post Vietnam, and it kind of shows how it impacts his psyche. The Dandelion Wine comparison does not really hold up the more that I think about it, but it's just like that's what I thought at first because I was wondering how all these threads were going to be connected. And I paused it a few times to go get a snack or use the restroom. And every time I'd be like, oh, there's 45 minutes left. And I had read the summary, the really short one on Netflix that just said like he saves a child sex worker from her situation. And he had seen Jodie Foster's character a few times, but nothing had really come of it. And I was kind of like, what's happening? And then there's this whole line the whole storyline with the senator. And I just kind of wondered whether they would all culminate into something big. And I think they did, but I think these storylines are all just part of this guy's weird and wacky life in this terrible kind of Hell's Kitchen-esque New York. And I don't know yet whether I liked it. This was one of those movies where I was like, I'm going to need to talk to Ian about this and see what he thinks, because I can't decide like whether I enjoyed it, whether it was just intriguing to watch because it was different than anything I've ever seen. It didn't feel like a Scorsese in the way that like Raging Bull or whatever other Scorsese's we have watched.
Goodfellas, we've
Yeah,
talked about.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like it didn't feel like that classic mob De Niro movie, which is what Scorsese is obviously best known for. So yeah, I think the best way I can sum it up is it was intriguing, and to watch it for the first time with no cultural context whatsoever was just an experience. I guess the movie just feels like an experience, and it doesn't lean too heavily on storytelling tropes and certain motifs that you might come to expect from Scorsese and just from storytellers in general nowadays. But that's kind of where I landed on it, is uncertainty. But like, I didn't dislike it. I was just kind of jarred.
It is jarring. This is, I think, the second time I've ever watched Taxi Driver all the way through. It's one of those movies that we might have talked about before, because we've talked about a lot of movies, but I've watched it once and then I will buy every version of it on physical media. You know, I had the DVD, got the
Mm-hmm.
Blu-ray and all that. And now it's on Netflix. Uh,
Until March 31st.
oh, really?
Yeah,
Then it's going away.
Netflix made a point of telling me that, and I was like, "Well, I'm watching it today, so who cares?"
There you go. But you know, I'll own it because I know someday I'm going to want to pull it down and watch it. And ironically, even though I've got this nice features packed Blu-ray, I watched it on Netflix because
Because it's
like,
2021,
well,
45 years later.
It's like 8 o'clock last night. The kids are in bed. I can't be in the living room with the, you know, people getting blown away like in
Mm-hmm.
stereo. But it was just as impactful watching it on my laptop, which was, you know, an odd experience because it's so colorful. It is a lot like jazz. I mean, Bernard Herrmann, who did the theme, the Psycho theme music, famously, another
Mm-hmm.
movie we've talked about, but it's a totally different score here. It's all like
He did
very,
this score too.
yes, yeah,
Now that's impressive. I rarely make notes on what to talk about because I just like to let it kind of flow. But the one thing that I did, like, I didn't write it down, but I was like, I need to talk about the soundtrack because it was just fire.
yeah. Well, it's that, and also the visuals. Like when Travis is driving through the streets, he's seeing all the neon, all the sex workers, all the pimps, and you know, all this different strata of society. But it's not quite impressionistic, but they're all very vibrant paintings. It's like a series of montage paintings of street scenes, but they happen to be, you know, photographed brilliantly in, you know, very vivid colors, like these greens and reds and purples. It reminded me of the Joker movie that came out a couple of years ago now with Joaquin Phoenix. A lot of people were just saying that movie is a ripoff of Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy, which Scorsese did both of those films, and he produced the Joker movie. So I'm like, yeah, it makes sense, and I also happen to agree. um, you know, I know Joker has his big supporters, but for me, the source material is more impressive than the derivation of it in this case. So what fascinated me off the bat, and I watched Taxi Driver for the first time when I was way too young. I didn't get it. It was too slow. I, you know, got the cultural references. The explosion of violence towards the end was cool, but I was like, this is just dragging on and going nowhere. And he's just driving and monologuing. But that's the entire point of the movie, which is something I appreciate as an adult. Um, but De Niro, this and The King of Comedy, I haven't seen every De Niro film, but these are the two roles that really stick out as being so un-Robert De Niro that I'm like, I wish he had just done more, had more variation in his career instead of, like you suggested, just kind of getting caught up playing these mob types or mob adjacent types.
Yeah, his pantheon, from what little of it I've seen, is a little bit homogenized, and by Scorsese, and it's not bad. He performs very well. He's a famous actor for a reason, right? But like, seeing that he's capable of this and that, I'm like, well, I want the other two. I want it all. I want the Robert De Niro who stars in a Marvel movie, which, hey, maybe it could happen. Who knows? But it's just, I also was floored by how young he was, because I've only seen him in some of the later stuff, and I was like, it didn't resonate with me how young he was. And I'm like, wow, this like 20 something year old kid. And it was just that, I guess the timing of it lends really well to his character, because I didn't get a lot of this from the context of the movie itself, but I always read a summary before we chat so I can refresh myself. And like, I didn't realize that he was clearly a Viet Nam vet and, really struggling with PTSD and all that. Like, the clues are there, obviously, now, but the way that he kind of portrays that, it putting on a front of, like, quote unquote, I'm okay, to a lot of people, like the letter he sends to his parents, or at least writes to them, I don't know whether he sent it, is really, really impactful to me, because you get these moments that just juxtapose his descent into madness, for lack of a better term, that is just so much more interesting than, you see him in a casino and he's like, oh, beepity boppity boopy, you got to do a sports book lines and this and that. And like, he's very kind of gung ho Italian mobster, right? And you know that he has this front and that it's going to fall and he's going to be violent or terrible. In this one, you kind of don't know where his character is going to go. And it lends a sort of unpredictable nature to the movie that I really appreciated. And then I didn't find in other DeNiro flicks. Raging Bull is another great example. You just know he's going to be a dickhead. And I mean, that's also based on a true story, but like, there's just so much more nuance here to De Niro's character than I've ever seen before. And it's a little bit sad knowing kind of what he became. Again, still great, an amazing actor, but like, you can do this too. And why haven't you? I don't, that doesn't click. I don't get it.
Yeah, it's funny. The other kind of offshoot of from that type that he plays is probably the Meet the Parents movies from 20 years ago, which I thought he was great in too, because he was kind of playing the intimidating guy, but it was also a comedy. I never saw the Analyze This or Analyze That movies, so I can't really speak to that, but in that he was playing a mobster too. But yeah, in regards to this, he was, I think, in his early 30s. I know Travis Bickle is supposed to be 26. And this is, I think he was discharged from his service in like 3 years before this movie takes place. So he is, practically just a kid. And he has a lot of, viewpoints that are way unacceptable, by today's standards. But watching the totality of the movie, it does kind of come out that he probably is, conservative. I don't know how politically aligned he is, because when he's talking to the senator in his cab, he's like, oh, I don't really pay attention to politics. I don't really swing one way or the other. But from the things that he says and the things that we can hear him think, we kind of get the idea that he's not the most liberal or tolerant fellow on the planet. But he's also not the grossest character in this in this movie. So Scorsese and Paul Schrader, who wrote the screenplay, they really play around with our sympathies, because for as much as Travis Bickle is an emotionally unstable killer by the end of the film, at the very end of the film we get this sense that it's almost like, I know you haven't seen A Clockwork Orange yet. We haven't talked about that, right? Well, not to give too much away, but there's a sense towards the end of the film that maybe things are okay, and then there's like this flash. And here it's when you've got the nice kind of sax and piano music, and then when he adjusts the mirror, it's like he catches something out of the corner of his eye, and he adjusts the mirror, and there's just like this, and then it kind of goes back to the nice music. Like, oh, that's right, I forgot. He's not well.
Yeah, it's almost like even this is more of like a tepid moment, but the Graduate has a similar kind of vibe that isn't quite as abrupt, but it's like, they go through this whole, we're going to be together, and now we're in the back of this bus, and then they just go blank.
That's another perfect example.
And they're like, this something's screwy here. That's very interesting. And I think as we're talking more about the movie and just kind of how Scorsese and De Niro have fallen into their comfort zone, what I find really intriguing is that this whole like taxi driver genre doesn't feel to me like it has been done to death in the way that many other genres have. I'm sure there's media I'm missing, but one thing that sprung to mind for me was there's an episode of Master of None, which is Aziz Ansari's show on Netflix.
Yeah. And
it just tells the story of like a few people in New York. One of them is a person who's hard of hearing and speaks in sign language, and it kind of shows what a day like is for them. And then it transfers to a cab driver, and it shows a little slice of life there. And that kind of really niche subgenre is super interesting to me, because it's like you're creating a main character out of someone who would normally just be a cameo or a one-off character in somebody else's story. And I think that there's a space for that, especially in modern storytelling, for those types of narratives, because everybody's the main character of their own story. And it's like Taxi Driver is what, the hero, aka the senator, is probably the star of some other movie somewhere else.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
he has a lookalike and he has a heart attack and the lookalike takes over for him and ends up falling in love with the guy's wife. Not That's just an example, not that there's actually a movie called Dave that's just like that. um, but I'm interested in those kind of stories now. Like, I kind of am getting tired of just like the hero goes through the hero's journey and experiences all the steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm fine watching those. It's like, it's like steak and potatoes. You got to have those types of stories. But I also want something different from time to time. And that's what Taxi Driver does really well, is taking a character that normally would just be like a quick fire, oh, take me to 47th and second. And I don't know if that's actually an intersection. It very well could be, but like that's interesting, right? It's fun to see somebody who normally wouldn't get time in the spotlight, even if it's like a Tarantino-esque violent rampage, um, that just tells an interesting tale that isn't something you've seen before. And listen, I get that it came out in '76, so this isn't exactly new, but it is to me. And I appreciate that kind of storytelling, whether it's a Taxi Driver or not. Like, I would love a fantasy book where it's like you're a dragon Uber driver and, you're taking wizards to their factories where they're making magical drugs and shit. Like, I don't know. I would watch that too. It's just an interesting take on a story.
Well, there's, you mentioned Tarantino. There's the taxi driving scene in Pulp Fiction with Bruce Willis, and then there's also another movie came out in '91, I think, called Night on Earth, and it's Jim Jarmusch, and that's essentially about a bunch of different cab rides in different cities across the world, taking place during one 12-hour period or whatever. But I agree, there's something to this idea of the main character being not the main character. And I mean, there was something in the water back in like the '90s because there's a show called Taxi Cab Confessions, which was like these kind of lurid, like there's a dash cam, and we're getting far afield here, but I I agree. There's something about this movie that is unlike other Scorsese films that I've seen. I think it's one of my favorites. Having only really seen it for the first time with adult eyes that can comprehend what I'm
Mm-hmm.
watching last night, I just thought it was so compelling, especially because with just a couple of tweaks, Travis Bickle could have been a Patrick Bateman type character where you're watching
Right.
it knowing that you're not supposed to have any sympathy for this guy. Um, and especially knowing that, in a modern context, we have very recent examples of these lone wolves going nuts and killing a bunch of people. It just happens that in this case, Travis Bickle killed the right people.
Right.
He
He got lucky
took
because he
down
got
took
caught
down a
trying to,
whorehouse. Right.
yeah, he got caught trying to assassinate a senator. And so he got lucky and then killed
That's
a bunch of
another.
gangsters, right? Like, it's, uh, and, and that's a surprisingly relevant storyline right now, which is incredibly sad to me.
Yeah.
But obviously it is relevant. It's just something that exists within our culture today. But, um, you know, jumping back very slightly to the whole, it's a different Scorsese vibe. I think something you mentioned earlier about kind of the neonish feel of the red light district and all that. The film almost feels like a noir, but there's no gumshoe detective who's a recovering alcoholic. It's just a guy who doesn't really have any mysteries, but like the one thing he's trying to figure out is himself because he's lost it to this war. And I like that. I like that it's a journey of self-discovery, and it's the dark side of self-discovery. And it's not just him that experiences that. Jodie Foster's character gets it, and then you also have these foils to Travis Bickle, like Betsy, who clearly, has herself together and has kind of figured out what she is, or who she is and what she wants. Um, so putting him next to these characters really shows you how much he's struggling. But then on the other end, you have a girl who is literally forced into sex work and has no way out. And it's like, you kind of have to compare these terrible situations these people are in. And it's a really weird, like funky pseudo noir uh, aspect of the film that isn't present the entire time. Like when he's in the election office, it just feels like a romantic comedy because he's going to ask her, out. And there's all sorts of genre melding going on. And that's also what makes it unique. It's kind of like a melting pot of different cinematic tropes with the Scorsese twist. And it all just goes back to the fact that, like, I wish he would do more stuff like this and mess around and experiment a little bit. I've seen plenty of mob movies.
Well, there's he spends a lot of time watching television.
Same.
And yeah, right. But there's that scene in the one of the later scenes in the campaign office, because Sybil Shepherd, who plays Betsy, she's like the campaign manager, at least the office manager of this candidate named Palantine. I keep wanting to call him Palpatine. Uh, but and Albert Brooks plays, I don't even remember what his name is, if he got a name in this film, but he's like the office assistant slash co-manager speechwriter that's interested in Betsy, but she's not interested in him. When Travis Bickle shows up, there's an immediate jealousy, and at one point Albert Brooks tries to come to her aid and kick Travis Bickle out, and right as he's dragging him out the door, Bickle poses, like, gets into this weird karate, like kung fu mode, like he's about to strike him. Like, he doesn't know martial arts. That's just from watching TV. But what's interesting is you said that Travis does not have, he has an identity problem. He hasn't gotten himself figured out, and these other people do. What I think is cool is that they don't really. They seem to, because they're navigating the world.
He thinks they do.
He thinks they do, but by him interacting with them, he forces them to reevaluate who they are. From Betsy, who, she's the kind of buttoned up, college educated woman who wants to be at the top of, the presidential, like she wants to be in the cabinet, or at least, adjacent to that power. So you'd think, oh, she's just going to date Ivy League guys, probably some boring stiff like Albert Brooks's character. But she gets excited by Travis Bickle because he's unlike anything she's ever really known. But she quickly finds out that he's got problems, but he's also got ideas that butt right up against her, more buttoned up, proper conservatism. Their first date is he takes her to a porno movie. She storms out. And with Jodie Foster, she's a 12-and-a-half-year-old prostitute who seems fine with what she's doing, and she's, very kind of cold about it. But he is probably the first male figure, besides maybe her parents, who gave her any sense of, self-worth or value. Not that she needed to be given it, but kind of helped her realize that, you're better than this. You don't need to be turning tricks on the street. Go home. And there are a couple other characters that he runs into. I would say the senator in the taxi cab, because he makes the mistake, or one of his aides does, of saying, "So why do you support the candidate?" And then Bickle goes on this, kind of a crazy
Rorschach.
Yeah, very much so. Very Rorschach character. Now I'm wondering about that influence of Alan Moore.
I thought that the second he started talking to the senator, I was like, this is a Rorschach line, like, right? Is it?
Seriously. And Rorschach was also, very kind of a right-wing nut job, not in the case that the sense we think of them now, but in terms of like an 80s anti-hero. And you get the sense from the senator Palantine in the back seat. He's like, oh God, this guy's one of my supporters. Like, what message am I sending?
Like, even if I win, I can't win, because this is the guy that's backing me.
Right. And I was kind of fuzzy on the assassination plot, because DeNiro at first seems really into this guy because Betsy is supporting him. He's like, oh, I don't know what he's about, but if you're for him, he's got to be great. But then in the taxi cab, you get the sense that because of his sort of mealy-mouthed non-response to things, like, he's saying, yeah, there's too much trash in the city and needs to all be washed away. He's expecting the guy to say, yeah, I'm going to get in there and just like lock people up, and I'm going to be Rudy Giuliani. He's not getting that answer. And so then I think he's processing like, well, this guy's part of the problem and he needs to be taken out. So it's kind of it's not exactly a straight line from that moment to assassination, but I can kind of see how he got there. And because that attempt was foiled, he had to do something with that build up, that rage. He's creating gunslings and he's burning himself on the stove to toughen up, and he's doing all these crazy crunches and pull-ups. He can't just say, well, that didn't work out, I'm going to go home and watch TV, mostly because he broke his TV. So it comes out in this bonkers building raid. But before we get to that, let's talk about Jodie Foster. She was 14 when she made this movie. I don't know anything about me. Well, I don't know anything about her parents, and this is not to denigrate them, but like if someone came to me and said, hey, there's this young independent director who's making this movie and he wants to do this with your daughter, I'd be like, get the hell out of here.
Right.
Fortunately, yeah, it's a good and a bad thing, because she did this performance. She got a lot of attention for it. I don't know if she won an Oscar or not. She might have been nominated, but she also gained herself a stalker, which was a very serious and scary situation for her coming off of this film. But there is something so wonderfully self-assured about her as this insecure character in the diner scene that happens after the flop house exchange, that I could have just, that was like the perfect little short film. Her performance, I couldn't believe that I was watching someone who was 14 years old, let alone the challenge of having to put yourself in the headspace of a 12-and-a-half-year-old prostitute who'd been doing this for who knows how long, but then to also act like that. I mean, Jesus
Yeah.
Christ.
It's really funny, if you look at just kind of talent nowadays. Like, I watch a lot of reality competition shows, as you well know. America's Got Talent being one of my favorites, but also just like in general, I like to follow just up and coming talent as much as I can. And like, there's kind of this revolution happening where like kids 12 to 14 and like, in that really early preteen age range are coming out with these insane talents. And like Billie Eilish is a great example. She's like not even 20. I think she might be 20 now. I can't remember, but she's won a bunch of Grammys, is one of the most profound like musicians of our time now. And it's just absolutely nuts. And I appreciate how there are many downsides to like social media and the internet and all that. But like, this is one of the ups, is that it's giving people a platform to share their talents way early. And Taxi Driver is like, it did that for one person, and that person was Jodie Foster, which is, it's just insane. Like, how do you get so lucky to find somebody that talented at that age to play that role so well? And what happened behind the scenes with her to like make her that good of an actress? I just don't, it's like a does not compute moment to me, but I'm also just grateful that it kind of springboarded her career, because she's absolutely insane. It's just, she's super impressive. And even in movies where like, I think they could have done more with the character, like Silence of the Lambs, like she's still fantastic. She's just fun to watch on screen, and your eye is always kind of drawn to her because she just knows how to capture your attention. And I was kind of nervous going into Taxi Driver because I was like, at however old she was, could she do that? Yep. Answer is yes. No more convincing needed. It's just like you're riveted by the backstory of this, supposedly 12-year-old girl who's been forced into being a sex worker. And it's sad and emotional, but you also, you kind of relate to her because she kind of has this like, whatever, I can't change anything attitude, which I think is what draws Travis Bickle to her, because he talks with the senator, realizes that he's a load of hooey, and is like, oh yeah, nobody knows what's going on. Nobody has their shit together. The same thing happened with Betsy. He's like, I think meeting with, I forget her character's name already, but Jodie Foster's character, Iris is, it's kind of like the final sealing the deal of like him realizing that nothing really matters and I can kind of just do whatever I want because nobody will care. And it's refreshing that it ends with him essentially saving her, but it's also a terrifying look into what it took to do so. Not necessarily that it took a failed assassination plot to save a child sex worker, but that he had to kind of like go through this terrible gauntlet of terrifying madness to realize like, oh, I should probably get her out of this scenario. He almost lost himself, it's like he almost
he had
just
intended,
died.
yeah, he intended to. I mean, that's the
Right.
thing is, he wrote that letter to her with a bunch. I didn't see how much money he put in the envelope, but he's like, essentially, Iris, by the time you read this, I'll be dead. The pimp, Sport, played by Harvey Keitel. Did you recognize him?
Oh my God, that name sounds familiar. And I want to guess that it is from Risky Business.
No, that was a different pimp.
I recognize the name, and Erin recognized him immediately, and she goes, "I know him from something where he's older in it."
Yes.
And she told me what the movie was, and I do not remember.
We'll play a little game here. 2 movies. Think Quentin Tarantino.
Okay, what is Erin like? Is he in Inglourious Bastards?
No.
Okay, That narrows it down to what, 8 more, 7 more.
We've talked about one of them. The other one I don't think we've talked about.
I know we've talked about True Romance. I know we've talked, which isn't technically a directed, but, and then I don't think he's in that. And we've talked about Pulp Fiction,
Ding, ding,
which
ding.
he must be in.
He was Winston the Wolf. He was the
I
guy
don't
who
even-
shows up. He was the guy who shows up at the end in the tuxedo to help get rid of the body.
Oh, okay, okay. I remember that now.
Yeah.
It's funny that you're mentioning this because there's another actor in this movie who plays somebody when he is older in a sitcom that I grew up watching, Peter Boyle.
Peter Boyle, yes.
In Everybody Loves Raymond. And it was so fun to see him as a young actor. And I remember being very sad when he died because I was a big fan. Like as a kid, we would always watch Everybody Loves Raymond. And that character was so funny. But anyway, back to Harry Belafonte, or what's his name? Harvey Keitel.
Harvey Keitel.
Kaiser Soze.
Now I just want to see Harry Belafonte in Reservoir Dogs. That was the
There
other
you
one.
go.
Did you see Reservoir Dogs?
I have seen Reservoir Dogs, and I love that movie.
Yeah, Harvey Keitel played Mr. White, the main guy who was trying to protect the dude who ended up being the traitor.
It was me.
Yeah.
He's dying on the floor. It was me. I did it.
Yeah. So it's great to see a young Harvey Keitel, because he's definitely one of those actors that I think I saw Mean Streets, which was an earlier Scorsese film in which he was even younger than this. Like he and DeNiro, I think, were in their 20s when they made that movie. So to see him with long kind of hippie hair and like this weird cowboy hat and wife beater and just like hanging out on a stoop selling people, I was like, what is this? What's going on?
This is one of those movies where I knew like very few of the actors, but Peter Boyle just stuck out because I clearly recognized him from Everybody Loves Raymond. But I will say that almost all of the performances in this movie are pretty fantastic. I can't think of one line or delivery that felt off or untrue to the character. So it's a testament both to the writing, the performance, the directing. I guess all of this adds up to, yeah, I think I liked it. But it was just like, there's really nothing about this movie that strikes me as this was bad or like I would change this. And when you can experience a story as a whole and not think I want to tweak this, that's a pretty damn good sign that it's solid, right?
Yeah. Well, the two things about performances. One, the one performance that I would possibly change is Albert Brooks as the friend, because you don't have any context for this, because I don't think you know who Albert Brooks is. Back in the mid 70s, he made a lot of like fake TV commercials, like the ad parodies for Saturday Night Live. He was sort of this absurdist, comic and filmmaker. And a lot of that, there's a lot of his dialogue feels like Scorsese or Schrader was just like, insert Albert Brooks funny bit here, and then just said, go write something funny that you can say. So that it stuck out to me. I believed he was a character. I just didn't think he necessarily belonged in this movie, partially because he's so funny that I feel like Betsy might have been attracted to him. But the other thing that really stuck out is Scorsese's cameo in the film. I've never seen this. He has 2 cameos in his own movie. The first
as separate characters.
Oh,
wow.
Yeah.
Even Stan Lee can't do that.
Right. The first almost feels like it was an accident. Like they were just doing some, B-roll on Sybil Shepherd or something, because when we first see her and Travis is narrating, like the first time I saw her, she was in this white dress and she was like an angel or whatever. She's walking slowly into this building. There's a guy sitting on this stoop or whatever behind her in like a black t-shirt, and he's got a beard. That's Martin Scorsese. He shows up later in the movie as the cab fare. He's like, no, I want you to pull here. Don't pull the thing down, pull the thing up. Don't pull the thing down, pull the thing
that's
up.
him.
You see that lady up there? That's my wife. And she's up there with I can't say it. But he goes on this insane thing, which sort of balances out. I think that's one of the things that helps balance out Travis Bickle as a character from a sympathy point of view. Like, yeah, this guy's messed up, but that dude is straight up evil. And we never find out what happened with that. Did he go up? Did he chicken out or whatever. It just kind of cuts away.
Yeah, well, that's part of the kind of the vignette aspect that I got. You just experience these little scenes that contribute to the story in a really indirect way. And that scene, every scene in this movie serves a purpose. And for that one, exactly like you said, it's, oh, I now have a point of comparison that is worse than Travis Bickle that allows me to feel okay with, in some fashion, rooting for him.
Yeah.
And that's what's kind of fascinating about the movie. But then, every second Travis turns around and does something that you're like, ew, no, I don't want. Like, he's talking to the Secret Service guy, giving him an address. He's listing off like 8 numbers in his zip code. Oh, I was thinking of my phone number. There's these little moments of humor that are unsettling because they stem from him just not being right and not being okay. And it's both sad and funny. It's like the darkest kind of humor you can have.
Well, it's funny because Travis Bickle as a pop icon, that whole "you talking to me" thing, to that wonderful shot of him like with the blowing his own brains out with the blood dripping from his finger. I've seen that on a million posters. He's got this reputation as being sort of an icon of cool, and Travis Bickle is not cool. He's socially awkward. He's got this really intermittent courage. Like when it comes to the assassination attempt, once one of the Secret Service guys is like, go follow that guy, he gets wind of it, he runs away. He scampers away. He doesn't try and pull something, because at that point he'd already written the note to Iris. Like he was expecting to be taken down by somebody. So it's like, even if he pulled out a gun and started shooting at whoever was coming after him and got shot, that you wouldn't think that would matter. He's just an innate coward. And we don't get the full story of what happened with him in Vietnam, but he's a naive character. He's so astonished and disgusted by New York City that I wonder if he was like a transplant from the country somewhere, just like could not handle modern living. Now, if that combined with existing issues, or if we're just supposed to believe that New York is such a cesspool that will turn anyone into a raving maniac, maybe that's another level of commentary. I don't know.
The city is afraid of him. He's seen its true face. He is literally Rorschach the more I think about it. He just is.
Yeah.
Who will drive the taxi drivers?
Now, you brought up something. I'm going to bring this up because I can't let it go. But I'd forgotten to send you the Zoom link to this conversation. I said I was too busy out saving underage prostitutes. And you said something to the effect of, well, at least she'll grow up to get a high profile job in the FBI.
Yep.
And I said, you've just created the Clarice Starling Cinematic Universe, because I thought about that for a second, like, ha. But then I was thinking, the timeline might work out, because she gets sent back to her parents. Maybe her dad then gets killed and she has to go off and live with her aunt or something. And that's when she goes to the farm and she runs away.
Here's what it is somebody knows that a vigilante saved her and is connected with sport or that whole ring in some way. So they hunt down who she loves most, but she escapes. And then the whole thing with the lambs happens, and they're silent, of course. And and then she's like, well, I gotta get this scum off the streets and become an FBI agent. And there we go, Quantico, it's calling.
We have to find another twist back to her childhood, like Buffalo Bill was working for sport or something. I don't know.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, it could be, that could be it. There's some sort of tether there, I'm sure.
Well, I think next month we're slated to, and if we're not, I'm going to change the calendar to make sure this happens, because we connected Silence of the Lambs to Taxi Driver purely by accident. But watching Taxi Driver, I remembered that we have an Albert Brooks movie on our roster called Defending Your Life. So after several months of rather depressing, dark movies, we're going to lighten things up a bit.
There we go.
And this is a movie in which I haven't seen it in a while, but I am not annoyed by Brooks's performance or his writing, because he wrote the movie for himself, and Meryl Streep. So any closing thoughts on Taxi Driver?
No, I think we covered it pretty well. This is usually where I go on some ramble about it, but I think this conversation kind of covered everything that I thought about the movie, and it was once again, an intriguing and thoughtful watch that will probably resonate with me more the more I watch stories to compare it to.
Cool. Yeah, it's one of those films watching it last night that I was like, why didn't I give this another chance earlier?
Mm-hmm.
It's yeah, I've got Scorsese's got a high bar for me now. Even though I've seen a bunch of his films, I feel like I want to go back and watch them and see how they stack up to this one.
Yeah. A friend had told me, like, you're in for a fucking wild ride. And sure enough, I was.
I need to look up a making of or something. Maybe it's on that Blu-ray that I haven't watched. The scene where Bickle is in his apartment and he's got the open flame and he's got just his arm over this open stove
It's very
flame.
Fight Club.
It is very Fight Club, but it looked pretty damn real. I was trying to figure out, is the camera placed so that the flame is sort of in the foreground, so he's behind it, but it looks like it's making contact, or what? But that was just savage, man.
Yeah, it was a very dark and decrepit training montage.
And we need more of those. No,
If Rocky is the quintessential training montage, this is like the Ricky offshoot, like who always loses no matter how much he trains.
well, I'm just Travis Bickle won in the end, but I thought for sure he was a goner when he takes that bullet in
Yep.
the damn neck. Oh my God, which is another very Fight Club kind of a thing. Because didn't Edward Norton get one? He got it in the cheek or something, right?
I don't remember. He experienced a lot of painful things in that movie.
I think that's it's coming back to me now. I think that's one of my spoilers if you haven't seen Fight Club in 20 years. He shoots himself in the mouth
Right at the very end
to try and
and that's
kill
how
himself,
he
and Tyler Durden,
right.
spoiler. But then I think it plays out differently in the novel, because the movie, he's still like walking around monologuing for the next 10 minutes. I'm like, what are you doing?
Yeah, I remember. I haven't read the book, but I know that the ending is different. And the movie, I was like, okay. I love the movie. I think it's fascinating, but I was, it's kind of a story moment.
Yeah. Well, speaking of story moments, we're wrapping up our talk about Taxi Driver, which doesn't really have any. I mean, it's pretty straightforward and everything, but I'm just wondering the twisted mind of Paul Schrader and Scorsese. Like, how does this movie even come together? I'm glad it did, but man, you wouldn't see this kind of thing coming out today. That's for sure.
Yep, man, it was something. But if you don't mind, I have one thing I would like to plug very quick.
Plug.
I just wrote a piece for The Quill to Live, which has nothing to do with taxi drivers or anything of that nature. I'm a huge fan of the show Survivor. And
You cut out there for a second. The show what?
Survivor.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's been on for 20 years, still on, which most people don't realize. But through many of my quarantine rewatches, I have noticed that Survivor shares many common threads with fantasy tropes, in that it has a unique magic system. There are lots of sequels and characters that kind of build up over long arcs as they come through returning seasons. So I wrote a 2,000-word essay about how Survivor appeals to fantasy fans, and it's going live on Quill to Live as of this recording tomorrow, so people will be able to see it as soon as this is live.
Wow. Well, this will be live probably Monday, I think. This or today, as people are watching it. That makes no difference. But I'll definitely link to it in the show notes to check out for that. That sounds
much appreciated.
I can't wait to read it. I used to be a huge Survivor fan. Me and my old roommate used to have Survivor night parties with pizza and beer and like 20 people in the living room making
we still
bets
do
on
that.
who's going to get off. Wow.
Yeah, well, it was funny because Survivor just had its 40th season, and it was all previous winners. Not every previous winner, but because there were 38 of them, but there were 20 people who had won the show who came back to compete. So
is Richard Hatch still in jail?
No, he's not.
Okay.
And he was invited back, but then they cut him last minute from Winners at War for reasons that are much clearer in previous seasons of Survivor. There was some misconduct that happened, and they actually kicked their first ever contestant off the show. And Richard Hatch was not part of this, but he has had a strenuous past in terms of his nudity on the show back in the day. And they were kind of hesitant to bring him back for very good reason. But as much as I would have liked to see him play again, that's fair. And but Winners at War is just like this crowning season of just the reality show that started it all. And most people just don't realize that it's still a thing. And it started in quarantine, or like right before quarantine, Winners at War. And we got through half the season and then we couldn't have anybody over anymore. So that was kind of sad. But we watched, Aaron has now seen every season as I have, because we've watched like 20 of them over quarantine. And I just kept noticing this and I was like, I think that people don't realize that Survivor isn't some hokey reality show. It may have started that way, but now it's something completely different. And it's a very unique social experiment with storytelling. And I just wanted to draw the parallels there because I think that if people give it a chance, they might like it.
Well, shit. Now I'm going to have to read your piece and probably start giving Survivor another chance. I just stopped watching it because I think it was one of those things where it's like Survivor season 13. I'm like, again?
Yeah, it's funny. It's like the show goes through the motions. It's like the seasons 1 through 13 or 1 through 10 even are just very early Survivor, but they set the stage for the future by like having returning players come for season 8 and then introducing new twists. And then like 13 through 20 is kind of this like old school Survivor renaissance where you have these players who like used to be focused on survivalism and are now focused on gameplay, but there's new advantages and stuff to navigate. And then you get to seasons like 25 through 40 and it's like Game of Thrones. Like and I make that comparison in the piece. It's just like the politics and gameplay and big moves are very much like you would see in a big fantasy epic. And it's just so much fun. Anyway, I'm basically reading the piece out loud at this point. But I had a lot of fun writing it. And it's part of a new series that we're working on with Quill to Live, where once a month, one of our writers takes a piece of media that isn't a book and kind of details its appeal to the fantasy and sci-fi community. So stick around. And one of our writers is doing a piece on Mad Max Fury Road next month.
Ooh, nice. All right. Well, yeah, folks, definitely check that out. Check out Cole and all of his colleagues at thequilltolive.com. Thank you for watching this, and thank you for hopefully liking this. And if you do like it, like
and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. Every time I hear like and subscribe, I think about werewolves subscribing to my channel, which, I don't discriminate.
Werewolves, not swearwolves.
I still have to see what we do in the shadows.
Movie's phenomenal. Aaron and I recently started the show. Also phenomenal.
Damn.
Taika Waititi he is on another level, man. I can't even explain it.
Well, I'm a big fan of, I think I've seen everything he's done that I know of, except for the thing that he's probably most known for. It's very ironic. Anyway,
I have not seen Jojo Rabbit, but anyway, we should talk about that at some point.
We should, and you should definitely watch it. Yeah, thanks again, Cole. We'll be talking Defending Your Life next month, and I promise it'll be a lot more lighthearted than 2021 so far.
All right, I can't wait, and I will see you then.
Later.